Island Baseball Network.
The calendar may say it's winter, but it's always a good time to be focusing on the boys of summer. From the stars who make the plays on the diamond to the ones who make the decisions in the front office, let's bring you inside your hometown nine with Inside Twins. Inside Twins is sponsored by Killebrew Root Beer, locally owned and operated. It's how memories are created and legends are made.
And welcome in indeed to Inside Twins. We're joined by Derek Falvey today, and it doesn't get much more Inside Twins than the man who is at the controls of the Twins baseball operations. Glad to have Derek with us. We're in the same building. We're in different locations to allow for this cool streaming platform. You can see the view is just a little different from Derek's office than it is from our network headquarters, peering out over the Champions Club behind us. And very excited to have Derek with us. Of course, our program is brought to you by Killebrew Root Beer, locally owned and operated, how memories are created and legends are made. And Derek, we're going to have some fun today. It's great to see you in the new year as things the drumbeat's starting to pick up a little bit, headed towards 2024. Quickly, state of the market, state of the Twins in that market, because it has been, I think sluggish is probably the term, but not altogether surprising, because certainly still a lot of time for things to happen and a lot of talented baseball players looking for work.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Happy New Year to you and all Twins fans out there. Excited to think about when we turn the calendar to the next season, next year officially. It's when you really start thinking about getting to Fort Myers and playing baseball. But as you said, it's the reality of free agency and the trade markets and the off seasons over the last really handful of years in baseball, probably over the last decade, is it keeps getting later and later. We end up getting a little closer to mid-January before some of the things come together in terms of deals. There were some obviously at the end of 2023, but for us at the Twins, we've had less, in the early going, and hopefully a little bit more action in the weeks to come. There've been more trade conversations, more things picking up, especially as some of the other free agents have come off the board. And hopefully we'll find continued ways to add to what we're going to bring to Fort Myers here in the next month.
Yeah, one of the odd notes I saw this week that the Twins are one of 5 teams who haven't made a move who were in the playoffs last year, who haven't made a major addition. Now, a lot of the popular narrative has to do with the unsettled TV monies that affect several clubs, including the Twins. Personally, I think that might be a little bit overblown in a simplistic way to look at it. The way I look at it a bit, Derek, and I would love your input on this, is I think a lot of what your roster is going to look like and what you need has to do with what is going on with Byron Buxton, like how healthy he is, what he can do for you. Can he play? Can he open up those DH at-bats for a slew of talented other players? Is that a big part of it as you're looking to put this roster together?
No, you're definitely right, Chris. I mean, when we think about our roster right now, we think about what we ended with, this year in the playoffs and what's coming back. We enter this season with Eddie Julian wasn't in the same spot that he was a year ago. Royce Lewis was coming back from injury and wasn't back yet, right? So Byron Buxton, as you mentioned, and we were coming off a procedure last offseason with the idea that maybe DHing early and moving to center field would be the plan. This is a very different offseason for us in terms of where some guys fit on our roster, ultimately what guys are coming back, which guys have proved a little bit more and have moved up the chain some. But for Byron, you're right. This has been central to our discussions this offseason. The good news is that for every week that passes, for every month that goes by, we get further and further away from his procedure, from his surgery, and get a chance to see him really progressing well. He's done BP work, and last time we talked, I think we were talking about him progressing into baseball activities. He's already done that, and he's done that without any issues. So that's huge for us. If he continues to progress in this direction, our expectation, and we've said this all along, we have made no secret of this, our plan is to have him in center field and to focus on that. How many games? What does that look like? That's going to be determined somewhat on how it goes through the course of the spring and into the season. But we're very optimistic about where he stands today.
Well, and that's such a big deal because when you look at some of the players available to you, just speaking of infield talent alone, Lewis, Correa, Polanco, Kirilloff, Farmer, Castro, Julian, Miranda, Gordon, Lee, that's a lot of good baseball players, and you've got to figure out availabilities. Byron in center field obviously gives you a major spot on the carousel, if you will, for some of those sticks.
Yeah, there's no doubt, as you said. I mean, Byron is critical to the center field picture. But we, like you said, we talked about Willie Castro a year ago and the impact that he made and the ability to go to center field. We're really bullish on a young Austin Martin having a chance. You know, he hasn't yet made it up to the major leagues, but he's a guy who can also play some center field. So we need Byron to be Byron. We know that. That's going to be critical for our success. But if we get that and we get some of the other guys that we just mentioned playing some complementary roles, both in center field and in other spots, that only deepens our roster and really gives us a good chance.
I know that a lot of talk is about Polanco, Kepler because they're veterans as far as other teams' interest, because they should be interested in them. They're very, very good players who will make a team better. But you've got a lot of guys who fall into that bucket. Who are some of the other guys that you get called on a lot? I know you're going to take every call. You're not going to make every deal, but I would assume young guys with high upside or guys who burst onto the scene and are still inexpensive, like an Eddie Julian, a Matt Wallner. I'm thinking your phone's ringing a little bit.
Yeah, there's no doubt. You know, we say this every year, and I know you mentioned, you know, both in Max Kepler's case and Jorge Polanco. I think it's pretty natural as veteran guys get closer to maybe free agency, you know, as they approach that stage of their contract, that those conversations are going to come up. You're going to see rumors, but we hold high bars on those guys because, as you said, they're great players. They were, you know, critically important to our success at different junctures over the last handful of seasons that they've been here and more in both those guys' cases. So I think that, you know, we look at it as we want depth. We know how important depth is. You know, last year, one of the critical elements to our success was the ability to tap into that depth, to have those guys step up and play those roles. You know, the other players on our team, you know, you won't be surprised to hear that teams want to know a little bit about Royce Lewis and want to know a little bit about the availability of Eddie Julian and Matt Wallner and those guys that you just mentioned. You know, our young pitching. A lot of teams look at our pitching staff and what they accomplished last year and have thought about ways they could access that, you know, and potentially bring in one of those guys. Again, we hold those guys really high bars on those types of players. We have to take the calls. We have to think about how we're going to rework our roster to make it the best it can be. But ultimately, we feel the core of this team right now going into the season is a really good core that we want to build off of that showed an ability to do some special things last fall.
Well, death taxes and Derek Falvey making a trade for starting pitching right before spring training. Those are three things we can count on. I look at the guys you've brought in, a Sonny Gray, a Pablo Lopez. You brought in a Chris Paddock literally on opening day. Joe Ryan came over. That was a little bit different. That was a trade deadline deal. Tyler Mahle was another guy that you brought over. With the departures of Sonny and Kent is gone, I know Paddock is back. Let's start there because you've got Pablo to front the rotation. Ober, Ryan, anybody would love to start with that foundation. Did you see enough from Paddock in his return to feel really good about sliding him right back into the rotation?
Yeah, you know, that was one of the highlights. There were a lot of highlights in October for us and some really special moments for Twins fans and for all of us around Twins baseball. But one of the ones that I went away through the offseason thinking about and getting really excited about was that preview we got to see from Chris, both at the end of the regular season and ability to just get back on the mound, show his stuff. He had made some adjustments through the course of his coming back around the shape to his breaking ball. One of the benefits you get, it's never good to have a guy have surgery and be down for a year. But one of the benefits as you're building back is you can work on some things. You can tweak your pitches. You can think about your repertoire a little bit. This guy's always had elite fastball command, ability to put it where he wants. He's had a great changeup. That breaking ball was an area of development for him. When we saw him come back and pitch in the playoffs, notably in that game against Houston, the ability to bridge those few innings, you saw a complete mix with real velocity, with real ability, obviously holding that over 5-6 innings and building. And we have a chance to have him over the next couple of seasons. We extended him during the course of the time when he was down as well. Just gives us a chance to add another guy that we think can pitch toward the middle and potentially work his way up the rotation as we go through the season this year.
So again, foundation there, Lopez, Ober, Ryan, Paddock. And then I want to bring up Louis Varland because Louis is a guy who was the depth guy last year. He came up, he answered the call, but then put on quite a show coming out of the bullpen. So I ask you as a group, as a pitching group, seeing what he can be and dreaming on what he could be as a back end of the bullpen sort of guy with his stuff, with his makeup versus knowing what he can do as a starter. How do you go about determining the preferred path for Louis Varland, and at what point do you have to make a decision along those lines to make sure that he has the ability to be ready for what you're going to ask him to do in the spring?
Yeah, our view and what we've communicated to Louis all the way through, and I think you think back to some different starts he had. I go back to really the first one in Yankee Stadium and his ability to just show up that day and really just post. we also got to see what he did when he transitioned to the bullpen there and helped us out in the playoffs, given the way our pitching staff was going to work. His best role was going to be out of the pen. But we want him to start. We want him to prepare to start. He's still young. He's still developing. I think what you got to see is that, and I'm not saying it's easy by any means, but he sure made it look that way. That transition to the bullpen can happen a lot later. It's a lot harder to prepare as a bullpen guy, work yourself back toward a starting role. So our view is, listen, he wants to start, want him to start. Let's keep that option in play. If at some point during the course of this year, during his career or otherwise, that really lines up to go to the bullpen. We saw that with Joan Duran. Ultimately that gives us a chance for another path. Not every guy can be as dominant in the bullpen shifting there as Louis showed, and we think that just gives him more options to be a really effective major league pitcher for us.
Duran and Jax have kind of paved that path. They've showed what you can do going into that type of a role. Speaking of the bullpen, Josh Stallman, we've seen what he's done against the Minnesota Twins. He's got that great breaking ball. He's got the velo. He's got the sweet haircut. Coming back off an injury, so a classic low-risk, high-reward potential here.
Yeah, our view of this is, when a guy goes through thoracic outlet syndrome procedure, which is what he had and came back, you said it. We saw flashes of him being a really dominant back-end bullpen arm going back the last couple of years. We saw it against us, but we've seen it against others. But you also saw some inconsistency. And oftentimes that TOS procedure, that's happening over time. It's not quite like a Tommy John where your ligament snaps. It's something that's been impacting him maybe over a couple of seasons. So for him to get that procedure, to come back, we had talked to him during free agent process. He was already throwing, got a chance to see some of his bullpen information, how he was throwing, what it looked like, video, things like that. And we felt like this is a great upside bet for us. He's a chance to a guy that can pitch toward the back end. I think about a couple of years ago when we brought in a Brock Stewart on a minor league deal and thought, maybe there's some upside here if we can get him healthy and focused on that, 1 inning stint, 1+ inning stint. And we saw that with Brock. And I'm not trying to put too much pressure on Josh, but he's already done it at the big league level. We've seen that. If we can harness some of that stuff, get him back in full health and back in the bullpen, just gives us another great option to pitch toward the back end of the pen.
Speaking of pitching, a couple of years ago, everybody was, it's going to be top of the zone. Everyone's throwing fastballs up. And last year was the year of the sweeper. Look in the crystal ball. What is this? Is this the year the changeup is? I've heard from baseball people the split finger is going to be back in vogue this year in the continued back and forth. What do you think's on the way?
Yeah, it's the cat and mouse game between pitchers and hitters, right? You're always trying to figure out a way to stay one step ahead on the pitching side, and the hitters are making some adjustments. And I would say that, that, as you said, the advent of the sweeper was clearly the move last year. I think the reality of us seeing, the way guys pitched in the postseason and having still to be able to command it, to throw it to where you need to be able to mix your pitches. The split and the change definitely have created some interesting opportunities. One example of that I think we've seen is it historically was taboo to throw right on right changeups or left on left changeups. But you're seeing a lot more of that. It's something that Griffin Jax did really well at different junctures last year to keep righties off of his slider. So as the sweeper becomes more of a common trait, you might need to see that split or that changeup kind of keeping hitters honest so they're not diving out over the course of the outer half of the plate on those breaking balls.
Our show is Inside Twins. We're joined by Derek Falvey. And again, you can join us live via the stream here. You can get all the pretty pictures wherever you find your Twins content online on all our various platforms. We're going to take questions for Derek as well via the Facebook page, via YouTube channel as well. And we'll take those questions in the back end of our program. Right now, we're going to take a very quick break. When we come back, you'll want to be by your computer. Derek might not want to be by his computer, but hopefully his family will, because we are going to do a little thing we call Photo Album with Derek Falvey when we return on Inside Twins and your home for Twins baseball. Chris Atterbury welcoming you back to Inside Twins from our network headquarters here at Target Field. Derek Falvey is joining us in this segment. Well, this segment's called Photo Album, and it's called Photo Album for good reason. You're shaking your head. Are you?
I didn't know about this beforehand. I may have tried to interject beforehand.
Do you have something to hide? Are you concerned about anything that might be out there?
There were some pretty ugly haircuts back in the early days for me, so I don't know what you're going to have here.
All right. Well, we're not going to do too much. I will preface this by saying that. So when I was in boarding school, we beat your alma mater, then called Governor Dummer Academy, for the New England Football Championship. And I remember it because the quarterback was allegedly a freshman, but he looked like 37 years old. His family was at the game, and it wasn't his parents. I think it was his wife and kids. Like everybody at that school looked so old, and they were kind of ruffians. They were all over us that day. You, though, look, as we dig into the yearbook here, you look, clean cut. Let's take a look at this.
Oh, man.
There he is, the man from Lynn, Massachusetts, and suddenly he's in private school. What's going through your head right here? You didn't frost the tip, so kudos for that, but you look pretty beefed up. You've been hitting the weight room.
Yeah, that was a different lifetime ago, it feels like, for sure, but there was mentioning the short hair. I always had really short hair at that stage of my life, so it was I don't even know what to say looking at that picture. It's a long time ago, a very, very fortunate experience that I got to have at that school with some great teachers and some great people in my life.
Yeah, and going from Lynn to Governor's Academy it's a whole nother deal. It opened up a whole world of possibility for you. And as we see, taking a browse through some of this next set of pictures, was this like a school ties thing? Were you Brendan Fraser? Like, did they need to bring in some talent? Because here's you as a baseball captain wearing the Mauer-esque number 7. And look at this guy.
Yeah.
Look at this guy back in the pocket. Walk me through the play here. Are you hitting the deep ball?
Gosh, I just hope I'm not throwing an interception. That's my only concern there. But yeah, that's one of my closest friends in the world right there, right next to me in the yearbook. One of still to this day, another kid from Lynn who went to school up there with me, and we've been friends since we were about 10 years old. But it was a great experience. Great opportunity to play those games. What's funny about that picture, the baseball picture you have of me with that person. He's a friend of mine from high school as well. Last week he was on vacation. He and his son were playing catch out at a resort in Hawaii. And guess who walks up to play catch with him? Joe Ryan. So he texted me last week that that guy right there, his 11-year-old son, got a chance to play catch with Joe Ryan at a resort a week ago in Hawaii.
Okay, that's weird. That's a little beyond the pale of what we expected, but that was fantastic. I need a scouting report. You're a talent evaluator. Give me your football scouting report on Derek Falvey under center.
Oh man, don't get me outside the pocket. You don't want me running anywhere. There's never been a Falvey with speed, so that's just the reality of my life. But I could throw the ball a little bit. I was more baseball, football oriented as a quarterback. I could throw the ball where I wanted to, get it down the field when I needed to. But you don't want me running the ball ever. That was a bad outcome for anybody.
All right. Well, at least you were the proper age, unlike your predecessor quarterback for Governors back in '91. Let's take a look at some of your other activities. You were the commencement speaker. You won the Academy Prize with a sweet flat top right there. You got that bowl in your house somewhere.
Same haircut.
This is my favorite. You were in the martial arts club. Kung Fu Falvey. Everybody was kung fu fighting. Walk me through what the martial arts club was all about.
It was really cool. We had a physics teacher actually, who's in that Mr. Nguyen, who was in that picture somewhere, who wanted to start that, and there were a bunch of seniors that year that said, "Oh, this would be kind of fun to do." So through some of the winter period of time when it was still a little bit cold and you were indoors a little bit, we did some specific training in martial arts, which was kind of fun. It was a way to break up, everything else that we were doing from baseball to football and more of the traditional sports. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Did you break boards, cinder blocks? Could you do some of that?
No cinder blocks for sure. I think we might have tried some boards, but they were pretty thin. They were more like shingles from a house, that weren't that difficult to get through. So it made you feel good though. It made you feel like you knew what you were doing. It got you to stretch a little more, which again, never been a strength of mine to have any flexibility. So it was a fun experience. Everybody
was Kung Fu Falvey right there at the Governor's Academy. Now let's move on. College days. Who doesn't want to spend their college days in Hartford, Connecticut? You can see the familiar, the smile coming into play. The hair's still a little short, and then this guy.
Yeah.
So let's say this guy's on the trade market. What do you like of his biomechanics? Do I need to get your pitching room in here to diagnose what you're doing pitching wise?
Gosh, you know what? I wish I knew a lot more than what I know now about the way pitching all worked. Would have done a mechanical overhaul to some degree, but yeah, that was an early year there. Again, always short haircuts all the way through, but that was my early stage years of when I pitched a little bit more, dealt with some shoulder stuff thereafter, mostly because of those mechanics and lack of ability to do what I was supposed to do on the mound. Then I quickly realized if I love baseball the way I do, I probably need to think about something that's off the field as I go, because this on the field thing's only going to last so much longer.
All right. And your repertoire, what were you throwing?
I was probably, fastball, changeup, and a little bit of a light breaking ball. I never had that good slider or sweeper, so that was never going to be a strength. I was more command oriented to some degree there, with a decent changeup from time to time.
Now, what kind of velo were you pumping up there for the
Bantams? Oh gosh, at the peak, at the highest end ever for me, was really right around that time of that picture, probably going into senior into college before I did, my shoulder wasn't as healthy there, was upper 80s I would get to. I would touch those, but never could touch at 90. That's for sure.
All right. Well, there you go. A little trip through the photo album with Derek Falvey. We appreciate your captioning those photos for us. Our show is Inside Twins. It's brought to you by Killebrew Root Beer, locally owned and operated. How memories are created and legends are made. Twins family said goodbye to a legend this week. We'll talk about that and take your questions via our social media platforms for Derek Falvey. All coming up next on your home for Twins baseball. Welcome back to our final segment of Inside Twins. Again, glad to be streaming live for all of you on our various social media platforms. And, of course, welcoming in all of our wonderful listeners across Twins territory on our fine network of affiliates. Derek Falvey is our guest. And before we get to questions for Derek Falvey, the Twins family lost a guy in the baseball world, lost a member of its family this past week with the passing of a man known as Slick, Billy Gardner, a true baseball character. He was an original Twin, started at second base in the Twins' first ever game. He was one of a small number, 14 men to ever have managed the Minnesota Twins. Billy Gardner lived famously in a Super 8 motel while he was managing the Twins, and when they knocked on his door to tell him he was being fired, the famous quote that he knew it wasn't room service because the hotel didn't have a restaurant. He was an all-time contributor to the game as a player, as a manager, as a character, and we dug up this great clip from the late Sid Hartman chatting back in August of 1981 with Slick Gardner prior to the debut of a kid from Bloomington by the name of Kent Herbeck. Let's take a listen to it.
Our leadoff man, Billy Gardner, is bad enough you're losing, but you got Smalley out. You've lost Roger Erickson for the season. Now Kuzman's indefinite. Ron Jackson is gone. Lucky you got a couple of these kids coming up, Petio and Herbeck. How do you plan to use them?
Well, they'll be here for the game, Sid. And, I was checking Tommy John stats out, and, just looking by the box scores, left-handers usually hit him pretty good because, he sinks the ball left and right-handers. And the kids at first base, I'm going to play him tight against them because I think the left-handers hit him a little better, possibly the right-handers. So when he gets here, he's going to be in the lineup tonight.
That's the voice of the late, great Billy Gardner. He was right. Ken Herbeck went on to get his first career hit of plenty of career hits against Tommy John and actually won that game off of George Frazier later in the evening at Yankee Stadium. Billy Gardner, a long life, well-lived, a New London, Connecticut native, a Northeasterner, and a true character, as Derek Falvey joins us now for our final segment. And Derek, it's so easy to think of wherever we are in the present as a culmination. This is the only thing that's ever been. We've been building up to this moment, but really we're all just part of a continuing line that was here before us. It'll be here after us, and baseball is made up of these legendary, wonderful figures like Billy Gardner, and a long life, well-lived, and baseball will miss him. His family will miss him. Integral threads in the fabric of our game.
Yeah, what's really cool is you hear those stories, and I didn't personally know Billy, but then when I read about him, you shared what you shared, and when I heard he passed, obviously his family will miss him, and a life very well lived. But that part you mentioned, we're all just part of that lineage. There's a unique connection you have back, even if you don't know the people, that you're kind of a part of that line, and that's just a really cool element to baseball and baseball fans. It crosses over generations. There's kids watching the game today whose fathers watched Billy Gardner and grandfathers and those who came before, and that's just what's unique about baseball, and certainly unique about Twins baseball is our connection to our history.
And one of the things the Twins do so well is to keep that history live, even as we're making new history with the coming generations of talent. It's a tough line to walk. I think the Twins do it very, very well. And again, with Billy Gardner, characters. Baseball is made up of characters, and they are a delight. And Billy Gardner certainly was that. Let's go ahead and get to some of the questions for you via YouTube or via the Facebook questions. Tucker B wants to know what Jose Miranda is looking like.
Yeah, great question, Tucker, and thanks for asking. When we talk about a lot of these young guys that we just mentioned on the team, if it was a year ago and we were sitting here, one of the first guys I think we would have been talking about is Jose Miranda. He was coming off a great finish to 2022. He unfortunately dealt with that shoulder impingement that ultimately led to some challenges through the course of the year. He wasn't quite what he needed to be all the way through. The good news is he's tracking well through the offseason. He's been in Fort Myers. He's getting himself in a good place. To me, that just adds another option for us, that can go play in the corner of the infield and can give us another chance, because when his bat is right and he's swinging the bat the way he needs to be, he's just another real force for somewhere in our lineup. And he's still a young kid, still got growth coming. But the good news is we feel he's tracking well from a health standpoint, that we'll see him in Fort Myers this spring.
All right, so that's an update on Jose Miranda, I should say. I'm trying to read two things at once. Let's see. Any thoughts here of visiting the old Friends barrel, some free agents? Donnie Barrels, Donovan Solano, a guy you brought in literally in camp last year, ended up being invaluable. He's still out there. Have bat will travel.
Yeah, Donnie was awesome for us last year. Did so many things, that we needed him to do. I remember when we signed him, like you said, in camp, and he rolled into the clubhouse that spring training had already started, and he was coming in there trying to get to know everybody a little bit. That's a weird thing, but he really settled in so well to the clubhouse. He fit us on a lot of levels. I think it's a balance, right? We've had some guys kind of take steps forward that are going to play a little bit more of those corner infield spots that he had. You had guys like Julian step up with the way our roster shakes out. We're not ruling it out by any means, but a guy we'll continue to stay in touch with through the offseason, see how the rest of January plays out and into February.
All right, we're going to hear from Blake here in a second. I was distracted, though, because someone asked if you listen to Social Distortion, who's also from Lynn, Massachusetts. So I was distracted by that one. I know you probably got a Social Distortion T-shirt somewhere in your closet. Blake Hellberg, Royce stays at third. What happens with Brooks Lee? And again, that gets back to all that infield depth we talk about.
Yeah, the plan right now and our plan going into the season, we want Royce, who hasn't had the easiest path, right, over the last handful of years of just knowing where he's at, obviously from a health standpoint, things like that. He had such a great year for us last year. He did so much, in what we wanted. We want to keep, infield. Obviously, he's a shortstop. He's played shortstop. Now we have Carlos there as well, but it's nice to know that Royce still has that in the cards, and he's going to continue to work there a little bit too. But we'll keep him on the left side of the diamond. Really, shortstop and third base. He'll focus primarily his work at third. And then in Brooks Lee's case, he's a guy who just had his first full season of professional baseball. And I think that sometimes is underestimated when the guy gets all the way up there to AAA, and he's a big part of, what we think will be part of our future here. But ultimately, he's a guy who continues to grow and develop. We'll see him in spring training. He'll be a part of camp like he was last year, and we'll continue to support his growth. He's not done growing yet. He still has some work to do and can ultimately fit in multiple spots in the infield. It's never a bad problem to have too many guys who can play shortstop on your team that can ultimately play other spots in the infield.
All right, one more question here via our social media platforms. Again, appreciate everybody who joins our program via the online platforms, also joining us, listening in across our fine network. This is a fascinating topic, and I'm glad Paul brought it up. The Otani contract, again, unprecedented. We hadn't seen a player like Shohei Otani, and we may never see another player like Otani. But the fact that he could get that type of money and then have all of that deferred. We make these Bobby Bonilla jokes every July, and yet here we go. As a guy sitting in a front office looking at that, where that money's being deferred down the road so they can sign a Glasnow, a Yamamoto, is this a slippery slope we're on? Yeah,
it's an interesting question, Paul, and it's one that we are trying to tackle. As you said, this is very unique. Otani is a very unique player, as we all know. Maybe no one will never see anyone quite like him again. But ultimately, the contract, the way it was structured, it's something that we're exploring. We're learning a little bit more about. It wasn't as prevalent. Deferred money has been part of the equation for a number of players across the last decade or so. I know, other guys on the Dodgers, Mookie Betts or Freddie Freeman or others have had this in their agreements as well. But the fact that it's becoming a little bit more discussed now and more prevalent is just going to be a conversation that we have to have internally. Certainly something I'll have with Joe Polat and understand kind of how that plays out. You do ultimately realize it does impact your future payrolls. You want to think about one eye now, one eye on the future, but obviously we understand there are financial benefits to doing that and kicking some of that further out if players are open to it. So it's a unique conversation for every player, every agent. Some agents are not open to the conversation. Some players aren't. So ultimately we're going to have to cross that bridge when we get there with each individual conversation.
All right, that's Derek Falvey. Great questions from all. We appreciate Derek's input as well. We appreciate Derek's yearbooks for joining us here on the photo album segment, as well as we wrap up another edition of Inside Twins. Last thought: when the Twins win the World Series, would you agree to cut your hair back in the high school buzz cut?
I was in it. If we win the World Series, you can cut my hair however you want. Right? You can make it purple. It doesn't matter what color it is. I'll be so excited that day. I'll be looking forward to it, and that's what we're hunting every day to try and do.
All right. When we pour the champagne, the Clippers won't be far behind. Derek Falvey joining us. As always, a wonderful conversation here on Inside Twins. It's brought to you by Killebrew Root Beer, locally owned and operated, how memories are created, how legends are made. That'll do it for this edition of Inside Twins. We'll be back again next week. We hope you'll join us then, whether it's via our social media platforms or right here on our wonderful network of affiliates, right here on your home for Twins Baseball.